Joining us now, former Speaker of the House, author of the bestseller, Trump's America, The Truth About Our Nation's Great Comeback. Newt Gingrich is with us. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm in Omaha today for the Republican Party of Nebraska. And, I'm very, very optimistic about how this election is shaping up.
Well, I'm glad you're there. Do me a favor. I think one of the biggest mistakes I made in my life in terms of supporting somebody who disappoints is a guy by the name of Ben Sasse. If Ben Sasse had his way, Hillary Clinton would have been the president the last 2 years. She would have made the 2 Supreme Court appointments. None of the bureaucracy would have been removed. We'd have open borders. We would have Obamacare on steroids. But he was a never-Trumper. Now he's blasting me in a new book trying to get me to talk about it so that he can sell copies when he hasn't passed a single piece of legislation with his own name on it alone that he sponsored. Sorry, it's personal at this point.
I gather that's personal. But, the fact is the never-Trumpers are a fossilized group that are less and less relevant. I mean, with every passing month, the president's support in the Republican Party goes up. I know this extraordinary rally in Texas. I don't know of anybody in American history who attracted as many people to as many different rallies as Trump has this year. It is just an astonishing achievement, and I think it bodes very well for the impact that he's going to have on both this year's election and on 2020.
Well, let's talk about what do we do about this caravan? By foot they make it in, 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks. But one thing that I think we both agree on is that I don't want a crisis precipitated at the border because Mexico is allowing this caravan to march through their entire country, and we then have no choice but to guard our borders because it's our sovereign land, and
right.
We're a nation of laws, and in the process, the people on that side of the border that are not respecting our laws could precipitate a crisis where innocent people get hurt, and I don't want that to happen.
Right.
Is that better?
So now you understand psychologically what Abraham Lincoln went through between 1858 and the spring of 1861. And he says again and again, we do not have to fight. This is you are going to choose. He said, I'm not going to choose. I'm going to defend the Constitution and do my duty, but I'm not choosing to fight. But if you give me no choice, I will have no choice. And I think this is, one of the great tests that President Trump is going to face because I talked to him about a person the other day. He doesn't want anyone hurt. He feels this very deeply. On the other hand, he has sworn to protect the United States. He has sworn to uphold our borders. And I tweeted this morning because it hit me this morning. If the president is serious, the Mexicans only have 2 choices. They can deal with the caravans now in southern Mexico, or when the president blocks them from entering the United States, they can deal with them in northern Mexico. And if you ask yourself this simple question, if they literally can't get across the border, they're stuck in northern Mexico.
Well,
and I think our position ought to be that Mexico gets to decide whether it wants to deal with them now or it wants to deal with them when they are turned back at the border. But under no circumstance should we accept them. And Sidney Powell has done some brilliant legal work on the fact that the president has the authority to block aliens that he deems to be a national threat. And all he's got to say is he doesn't have to defend his decision. He just has to say, I deem this to be unacceptable for national security reasons, and they're blocked.
Now, in all likelihood, I don't think it's going to get to that point. My guess is at some point, because of the economic connection that Mexico needs with the United States, that they're going to have to step in here somehow and turn this caravan around. How they do that, I don't know. But the reality is, by the way, and I do have compassion. I understand people in Central America El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, that they want a better life. But this is not the way to do it. We have a process by which we have an immigration system, and we're a sovereign country. You don't get to, create a crowd and rush the border. And my fear is if they get to the border, that could be a potential outcome. That's not going to be good for the people. If we had the wall, Mr. Speaker, built, this wouldn't be an option for them. If we had the wall, there would be no risk of anybody getting hurt on either side.
Right, but remember, in the near future, the next few weeks, our policy should be to hope for the best but plan for the worst. I think the worst case is pretty simple. The Mexicans end up, for their own political reasons, doing nothing. They decide that they expect Donald Trump to cave, and so they're just going to let, as many thousand people as want to enter the United States. What they haven't thought through is, what if he doesn't cave? What if he does call out the military? What if we do, in fact, create, in effect, a human wall and block people from entering the United States? Now the Mexicans are going to have what could be by then as much as 10 or 15,000 people, because the caravans keep growing.
Well, there was one report yesterday from a newspaper in Mexico that said it's already ballooned up to 14,000.
Right. So part of what I'm saying is, at that point, we have a real decision to make, and this is what Lincoln is saying over and over again.
Yeah.
If you're going to preserve the Union, you're going to do whatever it takes to preserve the Union. And he didn't say it happily. He didn't say it excitedly. Many of his key early speeches have this nostalgic sadness to them, that we're bound together by the common cords of mystic memory, that we have no reason to fight each other. And he's almost pleading, don't do this. Well, I would say the same thing here. This is the perfect crossroads to make the decision. Are we prepared to defend our sovereignty and to defend America? Or, in the end, can people bluff us, force us to cave, and guilt us into allowing them to invade our country because we don't have the nerve to stop them?
All right, we got to take a break. I want you to weigh in when we get back on what the next 14 days are going to look like, what you think of Nate Silver's prediction, and much more. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is our guest. And as we continue, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. Nate Silver, he didn't have a very good year in 2016, but he had predicted both of Obama's victories. Scott Rasmussen was the closest pollster. John McLaughlin was the other close pollster in 2016, and he says there's an 86% chance the Democrats take over the House, 82% chance that Republicans pick up seats in the Senate. I don't have a feel on the House, but I do believe Republicans could actually win Florida, Tennessee, Missouri, Nevada, Arizona for sure, North Dakota for sure, maybe Montana, and if they didn't have a libertarian in Indiana, they'd win that race for sure, but they got a good shot beating Joe Donnelly in Indiana if people don't vote libertarian. On the House side, it's very hard to get a feel. 40 retirements doesn't make it any easier.
Well, that's right, but I think 80% is way too high, and I'm a little surprised that Silver, for the second cycle in a row, is going that far out on a limb. The most recent survey indicates that, in fact, you have, in the very closely contested districts, I think this was an NBC survey, that they actually were within about 2 points on the generic ballot. Well, if that's in the contested districts. Now, we're losing the Democratic districts very badly. We're also not spending much money in them. We're not campaigning in them. We're not making our case. But in the swing seats that matter, we actually are basically tied on the generic ballot. And all I can tell you is I look at the issues that are going to matter. There are two things happening. You see this a little bit with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, the candidate for governor, who explained today that she's opposed to free enterprise in healthcare because she hates making a profit, and you never do any good if you make a profit. And she is just very left-wing. Sinema, the Democrat in Arizona for the U.S. Senate, who refuses to apologize for urging Americans saying it's okay for Americans to join the Taliban. What's happened in Minnesota now, where I think Keith Ellison may drag down the entire ticket except for Amy Klobuchar. They may lose the Senate seat, House seats, the governorship. because Keith Ellison is just so totally left-wing and unacceptable. And so I keep looking around at these patterns, and I think what you're seeing is a remarkable moment where the whole, for example, we were talking 10 days ago, you and I were, that this is a race between jobs and mobs. Well, if you look at the pictures coming out of Mexico right now, you couldn't get a better picture of a mob. And if you watch the Democrats... Let
me ask you, can you stay for another 5 minutes? I want to really get into this more deeply with you, because it's too important. We're 14 days out of an election. 2 weeks from today, you'll be voting, and 2 weeks from tonight, you'll be turning on your television sets, and you're either going to have great news all the way around, maybe it's going to be a split decision, or you're going to have horrible news. And you get to decide, ultimately, what that news is going to be. This is where your vote actually matters. This election counts. And you can shock the world again, and I'm confident that that can happen. That can be the outcome. All right, quick break. More with Newt Gingrich on the other side.
This is the Sean Hannity Show.
All right, 25 till the top of the hour. We've asked Newt Gingrich to stay with us. I want you to really go into a longer explanation. You had said Kavanaugh, Caravan are going to be the defining issues in the next 14 days. People will vote 14 days from now. I would add to that Caravan, Kavanaugh, the mobs. You saw what happened to Kevin McCarthy's house. They threw a boulder through the window. And you saw what they did to Henry Kissinger. You saw what they did to Mitch McConnell. This is just in the last 2 days. And it's happening everywhere. And I would also add that if Americans like what has happened over the last 2 years, in spite of Obama laughingly claiming credit for it yesterday, if they want the success to continue, the economic growth to continue, the prosperity to continue, I think this becomes a classical choice election. But I think all of those things hopefully will factor into people's decisions.
Well, I think that's right. And I think that in a sense, the whole question of what kind of country do we want to become, it's clear on the left that you now have sort of a brown shirt 1930s totalitarian attitude. That they are willing to use force. They openly say they're willing to use force. You have a former attorney general saying when the Republicans go low, kick them. You have various Democratic leaders saying it's okay to harass people and drive them out of public life. And remember that Maxine Waters is not a trivial person. She would chair the Banking and Financial Services Committee if they get control of the House. So the significant people are saying these things, building on a sense of rage and a sense of the illegitimacy of the modern American government, which the left passionately believes. I think that you're right that that's a factor. The reason I picked Kavanaugh and Caravans as the central moment is these are historic events. I mean, the Kavanaugh fight wasn't just politics. It was historic. Were we going to get a solid conservative on the Supreme Court, or were we going to be smeared and character assassinated and lied and manipulated and browbeaten into backing down? Now, that was a historic moment that will have an effect for the next 40 or 50 years. Similarly, this caravan, whether it's 7,000 people or the Mexican newspaper is right and it's already up to 14,000, if this caravan can get into the United States, how big is the next caravan and the caravan after that? I mean, it's not like it's a one-time event here. The entire world is watching to see whether or not we have the guts to protect the United States of America from an invasion. And if we don't, trust me, there will be a lot of people willing to come.
Well, I think I know exactly where they're going to head, too, straight to California, the sanctuary state, and get the free health care that Gavin Newsom is offering to provide for them. That's where I'd go.
Well, and remember, because we sooner or later have to have a showdown about this, there's no such thing as a sanctuary state. To be a sanctuary state, you have to decide that your state can, in fact, impose on the federal government activities which it cannot possibly impose. And at some point, we're going to have a big collision with sanctuary cities and sanctuary states because they're a fundamental violation of the Constitution.
Well, I think that this is, I do agree with you. I have a pretty good feeling about the Senate. I think that the way events and the debate has moved, I think there's been a dramatic shift for certainly the Kavanaugh case. You know, it's amazing to watch how the other news channels are covering the president's speech last night. They're actually fake news. CNN actually says president lies, tries to gin up division, and they've never covered what Maxine Waters has been saying. They've never covered a single thing of her saying, create a crowd, follow them into grocery stores, follow them into department stores, gas stations, and you tell them they're not wanted here anywhere anymore. Or what's happened to Pam Bondi or Secretary Nielsen or Sarah Sanders or Ted Cruz and now Mitch McConnell and Henry Kissinger. And, obviously this is the mob mentality is coming from the left. Nor do I see, Mr. Speaker, nor can I say or elaborate on any one issue or program they're offering that will help the lives of the American people. Not one. That's not what they're running on.
No, well, they do run on government-run health care for everybody, which they can't defend, and which when you examine it collapses because it's totally unsustainable financially and would be a nightmare to try to implement. That's the closest thing they've come to a big idea, and it's a really bad big idea.
No, I agree totally. All right, we'll be checking in regularly. 14 days to go. Do you believe the admission by this Georgia gubernatorial candidate that she burned the state flag? Is that going to change that race now?
Well, I don't think that doesn't change the race, but the totality of her being a radical, the fact that the organization she headed up may have filed 23,000 false voting registrations for people who don't exist. I mean, I think the more we learn about her, the more trouble she gets to be in.
All right, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.